With our elections on the line, I want to bring in former CNN chief White House correspondent Jim Acosta, host of the Jim Acosta Show on Substack, my friend Michael Steele, co-host of The Weeknight on MS Now, and former RNC chair. And MS Now's Michael Schnell is in South Carolina covering the Republican runoff to replace Lindsey Graham. It is a panel full of friends. Michael, I miss you so much. It is so good to see you. And I was wondering, as I watched these results come in, if you were running the RNC right now, how would you feel about this slate of Republican candidates?
I wouldn't feel good, because I think the reality of it is, for any party, you want as little extra noise as possible around your candidates. You don't want them to be perceived by the public as being against their interest or somehow obstructing the processes. When you have individuals on the ballot that have been very clear on the record that they are, they believe the 2020 election was stolen. They believe that there's corruption and, fraud within the electoral system. That goes counter to the experience of voters. The one thing about all of this conversation around our elections is the experience of voters. Have voters actively, outwardly complained about the system? Have there been protests and lines in the interim about or after an election by voters saying that this system is fraught with problems? No. So when you have people who are kind of leveled up in a political context, it is objectively BS for a lot of voters. And so it'll be interesting to see. Now, remember, you're talking about Republican primaries and who turns out in a Republican primary. And Lisa, you're looking at the far edges of the party in that regard. But when that person then has to stand against a, conscientious, straightforward opponent in the general election, that's where it becomes a real problem for the party, because that candidate will more than likely lose.
And I would add to that, Jim, if you're the Democrat, you make the argument, this person isn't focused on affordability. This person isn't focused on getting us out of Donald Trump's war of choice with Iran. They are focused on solving a problem that does not exist.
Yeah, but I mean, as I've been saying on my show, and I think Michael probably agrees with this to some extent, I mean, the party is Trump and Trump is the party. And you have to be an election denier almost across the board in order to get his endorsement. I mean, look what happened with Mike Lindell. I mean, Mike Lindell is screaming about voter irregularities in a GOP primary. That just about made my head explode when I saw that last night. And
then you laid down on your MyPillow.
And then I said, nighty night, Mike. No, but, and then the other thing is you have to look at what Donald Trump was just doing yesterday. In addition to saying, go out and vote for Mike Lindell, he was going on in a conservative talk show with, I think, Wayne Allen Root, is something like that. His name is something like that. And was talking about how he might declare a national emergency before the midterms this fall. This is the conversation inside today's Republican Party. I would love to go back and cover the Republican Party of Michael Steele. I enjoyed covering that Republican Party. Mitt Romney, I was out on the campaign trail with. That's not the Republican Party we have right now.
Michael Steele, I mean, here's where the rubber hits the road. Let's walk through this. 2020, Donald Trump tries to call into Georgia, say, just find me some more votes. What happens if he does have an election denier in the governor's mansion in a place like Wisconsin, and he gives them a call and says, find me the votes, and the person is willing to do it, willing to carry his water? What then?
It is the ultimate corruption of the process in the system. It is profoundly antithetical to what the citizens of that state decided. And that then becomes a problem for that governor. I mean, these things don't happen in a vacuum. If in 2010, in 2020, Raffensperger and others decided, okay, we'll play with Donald Trump. You cannot discount the outrage from the citizenry and the voters out there when hearing that text or hearing those tapes, then realize that their governor cheated, stole the votes from them. That's going to be a real impact on the state. And so what you're seeing here, very much to Jim's point about the party that I ran and the party now, is the party now is all about seeding that chaos if it doesn't get its way. It's all about feeding that beast. That beast is Donald Trump. At the end of the day, giving him what he wants. But there are consequences for that. We see some of that play out already in 30 some elections that you and I covered together, Alicia, over the last 2 years, that Democrats have won and Republicans have lost because the voters ultimately are clued into what's happening and they give their response at the ballot box. And when you try to take that away from them, it becomes a problem. So, yeah, you can go ahead and play that game if you want, Republican governor. But the reality of it is you will have to account for it with those voters. And that's something that the Republican legislature, the Republican county executives, and other Republican officials in the state don't want to have to pay the price for.
Well, especially as Democrats start to sharpen their messaging on this. Right. You had David Crowley calling out Tiffany on the election issue. Take a listen to what he said.
We all want safe communities, strong schools, affordable health care, good paying jobs, and a brighter future for all of our children. And every one of us has something much bigger to unite around. And that is keeping MAGA extremism from bringing the chaos we see in Washington into our neighborhoods right here in the state of Wisconsin. Tom Tiffany stood with those who tried to overturn a free and fair presidential election instead of defending our democracy.
You talk to pollsters or people who conduct focus groups, and one of the things they'll tell you that shows up over and over again is this idea of Donald Trump ran on the promise of restoring order. He saw that often through the prism of the U.S.-Mexico border, but there was this idea that he tried to sell that America was in chaos. He is now the chaos. And I think it's interesting that you see Democrats jujitsuing that message.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think Democrats, did themselves a huge favor in Wisconsin last night. I mean, I love Thanksgiving. Everybody, it's my favorite holiday, food and football. But,
woke one was crazy, Jim.
Woke one was crazy. But here's the thing. The thing that needs to be said, too, is they've been playing this on a loop on Fox News. I mean, Laura Ingraham was saying they're coming after your 401k. They're coming after this. They're coming after that. I was waiting for her to say they're coming after your little dog, too. They've been portraying what's happening in the Democratic Party right now as just sort of this infestation of communism. And look what happened in Wisconsin last night. I think Democrats understand the assignment. And, you look at what's happening on the flip side. On the Republican side of the aisle, as you've been saying over the last several minutes, they've put up election denier after election denier after election denier. And Donald Trump is less popular now than when I covered him in 2018 in that disastrous midterm cycle that he had in 2018, right before they threw away my press pass because they were so pissed off. He's heading into a worse cycle than that right now. And so, of course, I mean, this is all they have right now is to call Democrats communists. But is John Ossoff a communist? Is James Tallarico a communist? Crowley is obviously not a socialist, a democratic socialist, even by that stretch. And so, I think Democrats understand what they need to do heading into these midterms. And it's just not as bad as what they're saying on Fox. It just isn't. And it's not going to be that way.
Let's also think about what is happening in South Carolina. Michael Schnell, you've been covering the GOP runoff with Lindsey Graham's sister, Darlene Graham, and Congressman Ralph Norman. This isn't a fight that Republicans were expecting to have, Michael.
No, Alicia, nothing about this situation was expected for Republicans, but here we are. As you mentioned, this is now going to a runoff between Senator Darlene Graham and Congressman Ralph Norman. Graham, of course, is the sister of the late Senator Lindsey Graham, who passed away a month ago. Ralph Norman, a conservative Republican who's been serving in Congress since 2017. This runoff set to take place on August 25th. Now, in a way this shook out was expected. Graham had the endorsement of President Trump in addition to this famous last name here in South Carolina. Ralph Norman is just coming off of a campaign for governor. So for months, he had been crisscrossing the state, talking to dozens, hundreds of voters and talking to them about their needs and their concerns. But there are still a number of questions of just how the next 2 weeks will play out. The biggest one is, where do the supporters of the other candidates in this race go? There were a total of 10 Republicans running, including Congressman Russell Fry, a MAGA conservative, and former Governor Mark Sanford, who was sort of gangling himself as more of an independent, moderate candidate. Where those voters go is going to be key to determining how this runoff shakes out. And then the second one is the Trump factor. Yes, President Trump did endorse Darlene Graham, but she only won last night by about 8 percentage points, which is not a large margin by any means when you're talking about somebody backed by President Trump. And then when you add to the conversation the fact that 60%, more than 60% of South Carolina Republicans sided with somebody else. They voted for someone else other than Darlene Graham. So President Trump commented on this race last night. He said he's sticking with Graham. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, just so you understand, I like the other people in the race also. They're all Trump. I mean, they're all Trumpers, but, I endorsed her. I think she's great. It's really in honor of her brother, and she's really a very smart woman.
Now, Alicia, this is notable, the outcome of last night's primary, because a few weeks ago, there was the governor's race here in South Carolina, and South Carolina voters showed a bit of an independent streak. Yes, President Trump's initially endorsed candidate advanced to the runoff, but then she actually lost. Now, it did come after President Trump offered one of those dual endorsements, saying he didn't care who won at the end of the day, but it was his initially endorsed candidate who did not win. We'll see if that's a repeat with the South Carolina special primary here. But again, it was a sprint to primary day yesterday. Now it's going to be another sprint for 2 weeks to that runoff set for August 25th.